Can you guys hear me okay? All right, well, this is truly a hangout when you get me doing this. Brandon, my right hand man, is not feeling well today. So I had to get everything kind of going, which if you really wanted to hang out with me, this is what it's like hanging out with me anyway. So, you know, everything's always last minute and just compressed. Everything's always busy, busy, busy. Speaking of that, my bag is over there, so I'm going to grab my bag really quick so I remember what it is we're going to talk about today. But we can have any discussion. This is truly, you know, hanging out. It's kind of hard when, oh, I have glasses. Do you see my glasses? It's cool. It's more hanging out when you actually get to see people face to face. So who I do have joining with me is Christy. Christy's over there. You can't see her. I could point my, did you undo your video?
There we go.
All right. So Christy Cleve, who is just awesome. So welcome. Because Brad, we also couldn't get Brad because Brad's busy doing work. We actually do work. Not as fun as hanging out, I don't think. All right, so today's chapter is Because I Said So. So where the book is at today, if you're interested in the book is currently with the publisher. We're going to be going to copy edit, I think on Monday or Tuesday, at least that's what I've been told. Have book in hand after all that stuff that book people do. Christmas, I'm told, right? That'll be cool. So I just got back a little bit ago. I was up. Have you ever been, Christy, have you ever been to a Rotary?
To where?
Rotary Club? Rotary Club? You ever heard of a Rotary Club? No? You never heard of the Rotary?
I've heard of a Rotary Club, but never been there.
Okay. Well, that's where I was at, the St. Cloud Rotary. I've never been to a Rotary thing myself. It was really, really cool, though. I really enjoyed it. I guess it's one of the biggest Rotary, if not the biggest Rotary club in Minnesota. So there's 130 some odd people. And it was cool because I started off the whole talk. You know, I always like to kind of know who the audience is, who I'm talking to. And so I asked, first off, how many information security people in the room, right? Nobody raised their hand. So it either means that, well, it means that there's no security people in the room, is what it meant. So then, you know, you kind of, well, this is, all right, this is going to be awkward. Because I'm used to talking to security people, and then that language is very similar. It's not similar when you talk to, I call them normal people who don't talk security, you know, all day. So that was sort of fun. But they brought up two really good questions that I think are important that we can share now before I get started on the other stuff. One was, can we put the genie back in the bottle? I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. And the answer is, obviously, well, maybe not obviously, the genie was never in the bottle, right?
The genie referring to?
The problems we have with information security risk, you know. And so, yeah, what is the genie? The genie, I assume, you know, is risk, this problem we have with information security, or these problems. And the thing is, we've never had, the genie was never in the bottle. So you have to get comfortable with the genie. You know what I mean? So it's not about risk elimination, it's about risk management. So that was very cool. I love the fact that normal people bring these cool questions that security people don't bring that stuff. So I really like that. And then the second question I thought that was very interesting, heck was it? Oh, I get this one all the time. What are the top 10 things? Everybody, we live in an easy button shortcut world. So everybody wants, give me 10 things. Give me the one thing I can do. And so I thought, well, number one, you'd have to stop using computers. Number two, stop using your mobile devices. Number three, stop using IoT stuff. You know, you can, you know, I mean, those are because the more complex we make our world, the more complex I make my world, where I live, what I do, the more difficult it is to secure, the more things I need to do to secure it, right? So, but that was just such a cool conversation, in that Rotary Club meeting. I need to do more, I think, talks, more information security things with normal people, which, by the way, you always got to kind of stay ahead, always working. The first book is, Fixing the Broken Industry. Actually, the title of the book is Unsecurity. The second book is already kind of in my mind. It'll be Information Security for Normal People.
I like it. I
Right?
want a copy.
You want a copy of that?
Yeah.
I'll sign one for you too. Not just because you work here, but because.
Okay.
So I think it'll help.
Because I asked.
And you asked. Yep. Ask and you shall receive. So today, that's kind of all housekeeping stuff. Are we recording this today? You record. Oh, I saw Brandon jumped on just to record it. He's got pneumonia.
Oh, poor guy.
Yeah, that's not good, right?
Yeah.
Take some pills, fix that. What other things? So the in the Hangout, just like anytime, if you feel, I think everybody should be on mute. If you're not on mute, we'll probably mute you anyway. But if you do have a question, there's a little button, I think, somewhere that you can do to raise your hand. You can do that, or I am looking at the chat. So if you have something, you want to chat, type something into the chat, you can either choose to send it to everyone, or you can choose to send it directly to me if you don't want everybody to see your question or things that you want to ask or say. But truly for this to be a Hangout, Hangouts are interactive, right? It's not just Evan or anybody just standing there or sitting there talking all the time. So I do like questions. Like I said, I got 2 of them today that were just awesome. It made me think so much. I think maybe we'll write something about those things. So I'm going to get the book, actually the latest copy of the book, so that I have it here for kind of reference as I walk through kind of what this chapter is about. But the chapter is titled Because I Said So. And the point here is compliance. Many people confuse information security with compliance. Today, I would say 10 years ago when we started FRSecure, 90%, maybe 90, I don't have stats, but I'd say 90% of all information security investments were compliance driven. So I wouldn't spend anything here unless compliance, unless some auditor, some regulation, somebody told me to do it. So that was 90%. I would say, 5% of organizations, something bad had happened. So they had a breach, an incident, it sort of woke them up. And so then they decided to do something with security. The other 5%, I think, are organizations who want to do it because they want to do the right thing. So 90% is because I'm told to do it. And I don't know if you're at all like me. I don't necessarily like being told what to do very often, My wife will attest to that. She creates lists on weekends when I'm home for stuff to do. I sort of appreciate it now. But so being told what to do is different than what information security is. Yet that's the number one driver, right? We wouldn't do anything around information security unless we were told to do it. So I said 95-5, 90% compliance, 5% I want to do the right thing, 5% because a breach happened or something bad happened. Coincidentally, when the motivation is a breach happened, what typically in that scenario, organizations overspend. So the pendulum swings too far to the other direction. So I may have had trouble getting information security budget for my program pre-breach. Breach happens. Oh my gosh, I've got all the money I could possibly want, assuming I still have my job. Because we do have, there are instances now where, take Equifax, for instance. Susan Malden, who was the CISO at the time, she didn't last more than just a few weeks after that breach. The Target breach, they held, and the CEO, by the way. Target breach, CEO gone. The CIO, who was in charge of information security, Beth Jacobs at the time, she also didn't last long. So you do lose your job. So assuming you survive that, the good thing is you have all the money in the world to do the things that you wanted to do with security. So that 5%, it's got good and bad in it. Anyway, so let me get the chapter. I'm gonna get it real quick. You can still hear me though, even though I'm not on the camera. This is better, actually. I might be on camera. Okay, sliding back. Here's the book cover. If you ever want to see it, I wrote on it because I write on stuff. That's what it looks like, sort of. See the guy there with the umbrella? He's fighting ones and zeros. Art people do that. That unsecurity, this orange here, will be a different color. That doesn't stand out enough for European people. But anyway, it's taking shape, which is sort of cool. I don't know if have you ever written a book? You want to write a book?
I have never written a book.
You ever thought about writing a book?
Not seriously, no.
Okay. All right. Well, if you do, you should.
Thought what it would be like to write a book, but
yeah.
then decided I don't want to write a book.
I'll start off. So the first thing in the introduction, this is the first book that I've ever written. Writing a book is a bitch. Can I say bitch? I probably shouldn't say that word, but that was the truth. You should write a book if you want to write a book. Don't let the overwhelmingness of it get to you. Chapter, okay, so chapter, man, we did lipstick on a pig. That was chapter 3. We did chapter 4, which was the herd mentality. Chapter 5, chapter 7, chapter 6, chapter 8 is empty promises. That's too far. We're not doing that one yet. Again, this is what it's like hanging out with me. Chapter 7, because I said so. So motivation for information security spending. So I said it was 95.5. I think today it's changed a bit. It's more like 85.77 maybe. And then 1% sort of don't know. They don't have a budget that's justified by anything in particular. So compliance, let's define these things. So let's define information security first. So in chapter 1, I mentioned the fact that we don't speak the same language. Within our industry, meaning, other security people to other security people, you can test this, ask, a security person that hey, give me your definition of information security. And first they'll struggle with it, and then they might give you something. They might give you the right, or what I think is the right definition of information security. But overall, in our industry, we don't agree on this central definition of information security. That's one problem in not speaking the same language back in chapter 1. The second problem is I may speak information security to normal people, and there's a translation problem. Normal people don't get what I'm saying, and vice versa, right? When they say things that they can't comply with this or that or the other thing within our security program, we don't translate that well into our security program. And when we tell people to do things, we don't do a good job explaining why that's so important. That was the second problem in chapter 1. The third problem in chapter 1 was 2 companies. Companies don't speak the same language. And that's why we have this big, huge vendor risk management kerfuffle. Some organizations will do their own questionnaires. Some organizations will want a high trust assessment. Some organizations will want an ISO certification. Some organizations will want a SOC 2. Some organization, whatever. There's no single translation of information security from company to company. So having said that, our definition, because really this chapter starts out with, this is information security and this is compliance, right? Different. And I don't know why we think they're, some people think they're the same. So our definition of information security was managing risk, information confidentiality, integrity, and availability using administrative, physical, and technical controls, right? 3 types of controls: administrative, physical, and technical, because we have this problem where people think also that information security is an IT issue. Yet the biggest problem, the most challenging problem, is actually a people problem. That's administrative controls. So that's our definition of information security. What's our definition of compliance? The simplest, and there's a better definition in the book, but the simplest definition of compliance is doing what you've been told or mandated or required to do. Different things, right? Now, when people build their security program based on compliance, you get this checkbox security thing, right? Compliance requirements said to do this, check. Compliance requirements said to do that, check. That's so much different than managing risk. So you get into this checkbox mentality, and if it's not on the checkbox, it doesn't get addressed in our information security program. That's a compliance-driven information security program. A risk-based information security program would take a comprehensive look at administrative, physical, and technical controls, identify where there are gaps, and then you'd address those gaps. Anything that's not an acceptable risk, right? Totally different than what compliance is. That's the danger. Different things. You build compliance into a security program, not the other way around, right? You don't build security into a compliance program, you build compliance into a security program. The motivations are different. The approach is different. So anyway, talk about compliance, incident, doing the right thing. 7%, I would estimate, of companies do information security because they want to do the right thing. And that's interesting. I don't know if I have asked it before, but I don't know if there's any kind of universal answer to why. You know, when a company engages FRSecure to do this project or that project, I wonder how often we ask them, well, why do you want to do that? You know, you need a penetration test. Why do you want to do that? Maybe a vulnerability scan is better. We're running into that a lot with vendor risk management, you know, in our VendDefense product. Mm-hmm. Vendor risk management, you know, fits in. Obviously, it's a big part of a security program. But I think people go down this path of, well, I need to do vendor risk management because I need to do vendor risk management. But I think a better question is why, right? Is it because I want to be defensible if something bad happens with a vendor? Is it because a regulator told me I had to do it? Is it, you know, because I truly want to address those risks? You know, any number of things. I think the number one most prominent reason why I would do vendor risk management would be to be defensible. Because I know that some statistics are 65% of all data breaches come through vendors directly or indirectly. That's a big, big number. I mean, 60%, 65% of all data breaches are expected to come through vendors. Well, then I can almost be predictive, you know, and know, you know, okay, it's going to come from a vendor. You know, it's either going to come from logical access that I've given a vendor and potentially physical access that I've given a vendor, or maybe it's data that I've shared with a vendor. But the same why applies. You know, if the only reason why I'm doing vendor risk management is to be defensible, that's a legitimate why. We just need to address that in how we do things. Am I rambling?
No.
Okay.
No, makes sense.
Preach it.
It changes your approach based on why they want you to do.
For sure.
Take a certain path.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Because I think in the why is the expectations. If I understand your why well enough, then I can understand hopefully what your expectations are, so then I can either meet or exceed it. Mm-hmm. Or as a consultant who is supposed to be an expert in information security, I may not think your why is a good why. You know, let me tell you why I think this why is a better why. You know, because one thing I've learned in business in general is people invest in people buy the why. They don't buy the what and the how, right? It's the purpose of the what and the how that I think people really get behind. Have you ever read the book
Start with why?
Bingo, right?
Yep.
You feel it.
Mm-hmm.
Have you read that book?
Mm-hmm.
Did you like that book? What's our why? Do you remember our why?
Fix a broken industry.
Boom. This is awesome. My day's made. Thank you. All right. Oh, there's a Napoleon quote in here. Men are moved by two levers only, fear and self-interest. Mm-hmm. Napoleon guy. Whatever happened to him? All right. Problem one within this chapter. I've already talked a bunch. Do you guys have questions? Make a point? Anything like that? Or you just preach it?
Do you find that sometimes customers don't really know their why? They can't define that. Mm-hmm. Like, well, I know we have to do something because of this ambiguous threat, but I don't know how to really put into words why we want you to do it.
That's a good point. I think a lot of customers maybe haven't taken the time. I think we're all in such a rush all the time. just with everything that goes on in our daily life. I mean, just think about, you got up this morning and boom, 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 boom. It just goes so fast. The weeks go by so fast. I don't think a lot of people stop to truly ask that question. Why? It's fundamental though, isn't it? I mean, why would I spend $1 on information security unless I know why I'm spending $1 on information security? Why would I? And we did touch on this in the last chapter when we talk about herd mentality. Sometimes the why is, well, because everybody else is doing it. And so, well, is that a good why? So, company down the street bought this shiny new SIEM, solution. So should I buy the same? And is that a good why? People would say it's not. I think most people, if you stop to actually ask that, but then you see it a lot, right? You see that behavior.
Keeping up with the Joneses
type
behavior.
Yeah. Which is, gosh, it's so dynamic.
Well, customers expect you to have certain things like, well, this company has this. I don't know why it's good, but it sounds good. So if you don't have it, I'll shop with them.
Right. And hopefully you guys can hear.
Is your mic picking me up?
Can you guys hear when she asks the questions? Oh, good. Because I love these are great questions and great points that I think that you're making. So the name of the book, Andrew asked quickly, the name of the book is Unsecurity. They said that was more, the people, marketing folks said that's a better title than what I had originally. So what was your point? What'd you say? You said something cool.
So if you are, if your why to having FRSecure come in and do an assessment is because your competitor has had someone do an assessment and they're advertising that. So if your customers are expecting you to have the same things as your competitor, or if they're comparing those things and saying, well, you don't have security assessment or the security certification, we're going to use your competitor instead of you.
Sure. Yep. So as a competitive advantage or to stay up, well, that would be a legitimate.
That's a valid why.
I think that would be a very valid why. Yep. So it wouldn't necessarily be, those are good whys. That's a good why. That's one that I would struggle to coach you out of that one, and do a different why, but it's easy to coach you out of the compliance why, if we just stop there, right? Let's do a security thing, a security assessment, and ensure that compliance is part of it, as opposed to, well, let's just do the checkbox compliance thing, right? But your why is a good why. I like that why. So the question is, so much compliance coming at me. Most of my time and budget is focused on the compliance aspect of it, not the things that necessarily make us secure. How do we get out of that rut? Well, I think it's interesting. So take Hipaa, for instance. I think it's finding something that satisfies the compliance requirements, or looking for things that will satisfy the compliance requirements, but help make you more secure. So, we focus a lot, we do a lot of our work on information security assessments. So when a hospital or a healthcare organization comes to us and says, because it's a requirement, it is a Hipaa requirement that you do a risk analysis of administrative, physical, and technical safeguards is what they call it. That's in the security rule. I can meet that compliance requirement by doing an information security risk assessment, right? And then another thing that comes out of that is that I remediate or have remediation plans from my analysis or risk assessment. So that one's an easy one. So do a risk assessment that will cover the compliance requirements, but then also give me some value beyond that, some true security value. Because the letter, in that case, the intent of the law is correct, right? To do a risk analysis, administrative, physical, technical safeguards. That's a great intent if you read the intent into it. The letter of the law, however, is not. So that's another part of this chapter, is the letter of the law versus the intent of the law. GDPR, there's one that's right now everybody's sort of struggling with. complying with the letter of the law is fairly straightforward because that's open to interpretation. I can interpret this statement this way or that way. Well, I'm going to interpret it that way. That would give me some defensibility and make it easier for me, assuming, it's kind of a shortcut way to check that box. Whereas the intent might be completely different, much more in depth, much more difficult. You don't really know the intent explicitly until things start getting enforced. So hopefully you're not one of the first people. So GDPR just recently, ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office in the UK, had their first enforcement action of GDPR. Well, that's the first time we've seen something actually interpreted by the writers of what we meant by this. So you have to sort of wait through those things if we are sort of in this compliance rut. But I think as much as you can, try to interpret the intent of the compliance requirement as opposed to the letter of the compliance requirement. That'll be something that would help you get out of a rut. And I use the example of the Hipaa risk analysis thing. Yeah, that would be my number one suggestion. So many laws, so little direction. That's another problem. If I have a compliance-driven information security assessment, as opposed to a risk-based information security assessment. If I started out with a Hipaa, say I'm a healthcare organization, or say GDPR or whatever, and I started off with a purely risk-based information security program, whatever compliance requirement that comes along that's information security specific, the theory is I would automatically be compliant if I've truly managed risk well. Mm-hmm. As opposed to if I do a compliance-driven information security program, anytime they change the interpretation or say they change the compliance requirement altogether, I now have to redesign sometimes significant portions of my security program to comply with it.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, and that especially happens if I've got many compliance requirements. I've got some state requirements. Maybe I've got some, maybe I am in healthcare, but I've got an education component. So I've got some FERPA stuff and whatever. It can get crazy. And then it also gets crazy when you talk about like state. There are 47, maybe 48 state breach notification laws today. There's another like 16 data protection, data storage related laws, state level, and the 2 data protection laws, maybe 3. It's difficult to keep track of all that stuff. Whereas, if I just stay focused on risk, which is back to our definition of what information security is, managing risk. If I stay focused on risk, I don't have to stay as focused on all the compliance-y stuff, right? Mm-hmm. All right, so a bunch of stuff on that. The background on Hipaa. If you're in healthcare, you know Hipaa pretty well. It was actually written in 1996. It was interpreted a couple times, 2009, 2013, and some other things. So they've changed. Now usually the reason why they do that. So in 1996 with Hipaa, nobody took the security rule all that seriously. They took the privacy rule very seriously. But they also didn't take, healthcare organizations weren't moving from paper records to electronic health records fast enough. So then we had this meaningful use push. Meaningful use, one of the final requirements is that you do a risk analysis. That then, and I could talk about that for a while, but there were dollars associated with meaningful use. So if I met the meaningful use requirements, then I could have a portion of, or in some cases, all of my electronic medical record system or things around that system paid for. I'd get reimbursement from Medicare. So meaningful use was kind of this push to get everybody to, move to electronic health records. At the same time, one of the requirements for meaningful use in order to get the dollars was I needed to have a risk analysis completed, going back to the security rule that was written in 1996. So it really wasn't much done around enforcement of the security rule. The Office for Civil Rights was the kind of the enforcement arm for Hipaa. We didn't see a lot of business in healthcare until meaningful use. because now the risk assessments were going to be paid for and funded. And also, there was now more of a push around this, enforcing the security rule. So had I just lived by the compliance thing, I may have not even had a security program at all from 1996 all the way until, whenever I did my meaningful use stuff, which might have been 2010. So yeah, so 14 years of, if I did do security stuff, if I was a compliance-based program, it would have been just basic nothing, it wouldn't have been effective at all. And that's one of the reasons why, there are multiple reasons, but that's one of the reasons why healthcare is such a mess right now when it comes to information security. It's just because it's so compliance driven. They're so used to that.
So how do we get compliance regulations and laws to catch up?
Well, they won't. I don't think compliance laws and regulations will ever catch up because it's the letter. People will always interpret the letter, not the intent, until the intent gets enforced, enough times. Because there are dozens of Hipaa compliant or HIPAA compliant organizations that have had significant OCR fines and compliance action plans afterwards. You know what I mean? They have been living by the letter of the law. They're not negligent in that respect. But when a bad thing happens, that's usually when the OCR comes, by the way. They tried to get up front with an audit protocol, but that didn't work well. The OCR enforces things. So a bad thing happens, a breach happens, then the OCR comes, does their investigation. And anytime you have a regulator who's coming after the fact, they're going to find something. They get paid to find something. So they find something, oh, you didn't do this, that, or the other thing. So here's your, $2.5 million fine and your compliance action plan for the next 3 years that you need to comply with. So that's painful.
And then the organization can blame that one thing that they missed or those two things that they skimped on as the problem for the breach.
Right.
Whereas that's not really the cause of it. It was just,
you missed.
It's the symptom of not approaching it as a security issue rather than compliance.
Right. So if I had managed my security program according to what our definition of security is, I'm in a much more defensible position when OCR comes and says, well, why didn't you have this, that, or the other thing? You can pull out your risk assessment and say, well, this was the risk decision. We considered this risk. We considered this one. We deferred these risk decisions or deferred, treatment on these risks in lieu of these other more significant risks. That's a much more defensible position to be in than, well, the law didn't say to do that. And then they'll, well, this was the intent. The law did say that, Yeah. Did I answer, Doobie?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, so many laws, so little direction really is the first problem in this chapter. And my gosh, there's tons. And it's going to get worse because anytime there's a breach, people demand action. People demand, they petition lawmakers to do something about it. So that's direct compliance. We also have this issue of indirect compliance, and where indirect compliance affects companies is now it's an interpretation of the interpretation. So take, I'll pick on Wells Fargo because I worked for them. So OCC, Office of Comptroller and Currency, is the organization that really oversees HIPAA or GLBA compliance for a big bank like that, a big federally chartered bank. And one of the things they're going to inquire about as they're looking at Wells Fargo's information security program is how you're handling vendor risk management. Vendor risk management, because they don't, just like we do. And I would see, if you're a compliance-driven company, you're going to get hit with this eventually somewhere, vendor risk management. So OCR will, say, well, you need to do assessments of all your vendors, Wells Fargo. And Wells Fargo will say, okay, we do assessments of all our vendors. That's an indirect compliance requirement placed on their vendors now. So I might be a printing company. I have no compliance with GLBA. I don't care about HIPAA. because I'm a printing company, but I do business with Wells Fargo. I print stuff for Wells Fargo. Well, then you're going to get the indirect compliance push, right? The OCC is pushing Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo is going to then assess you. The problem with a lot of the indirect compliance things is companies that don't understand risk assessments and don't understand information security as managing risk, instead of them asking questions about the risks related to doing business with you as a vendor, they ask questions related to, do you have the same controls in place that we do? Because we know that we're compliant with all these controls, we're going to expect that you will have the same controls in place or similar. Mm-hmm. Now, this doesn't happen in all instances, and this doesn't happen anymore with Wells Fargo, but we all do things. I don't have a multi-million-dollar information security budget. I can't afford to put the same controls in my environment that Wells Fargo can put in their environment. So we have this indirect compliance problem. If I want Wells Fargo's business, I'm going to have to put those controls in place. So that talks about that problem. The solution to all of this is truly, it is to build a risk-based information security program based on our definition earlier. But where there's gray areas, read into it the intent of the law, right? It's the intent of the law that's going to be enforced. It's never going to be the letter of the law. Mm-hmm. Another thing with compliance is, and I'm not a lawyer, so I don't pretend to be one, but I've been in enough been around and whatever, enough legal cases to know some of these things. When regulatory, like take Hipaa or, take Hipaa, since we're already picking on that. That's administrative law. So there's criminal law, civil law, and administrative law. Administrative is, enforced by an agency. In this case, it'd be the Department of Health and Human Services. And in that is the OCR, that's kind of the Office for Civil Rights. They're the ones who are going to enforce the HIPAA compliance thing. Mm-hmm. So OCR gives you a multi-million-dollar fine and a compliance action plan. Say you don't agree with it, what do you do?
I have no idea.
Nothing. You can't. If you appeal, the court that you're appealing to, the judge works for OCR. Mm-hmm. The lawyers work for OCR. Everybody works for OCR. So the more you fight, the more difficult it gets. I was at a Black Hat Executive Summit in 2000. What are we in now? 2018? Yeah. Mm-hmm. 15, maybe December of 2015. Maybe it was December 2016. And it was super cool. They only did it once. They've never had one again, which really ticks me off because it was such a good conference. Because it was all CISOs and it was all just talking security stuff. And one of the guys who was one of the speakers who gave the presentation was talking about his fight was with the Federal Trade Commission. Same thing, sort of. I mean, it's administrative law, right? And he didn't agree with the FTC's findings, so then he appealed. And he had a legitimate case. And, when he talked about, well, this is his talk anyway. When he talks about what their findings were with what the actual was in his description, it's like, yeah, man, I'd appeal that too. I mean, it's injustice. Well, so he appealed and he talked through all these appeal, how that whole process went. That whole company went out of business. Yeah, because you just don't fight. I mean, fight the government. Good luck with that. So your best defense truly is, to try to interpret what the intent of the law is. If you are found to be non-compliant and there is something that's going to happen to you, try to negotiate as best you can and as respectful, as you can, and take it. That's essentially what it comes down to. There's no recourse. So problem 2 we have, which, oh gosh, this leads right in. I haven't read this since a while. This leads right into problem 2. Problem 2, you have no choice but to comply. And I posed 2 questions, kind of at the beginning, or 2 things. What seems more attractive to you, building a security program because you want to, and you see how you will benefit from it, or build a security program because you've been told that you must, and you must build it in a way that you're told, regardless of whether you benefit or not. Those are the two differences, really. And a lot of this is dependent upon what my attitude and what my approach is going to be, to compliance. At the end of the day, you don't have a choice. You must comply. It is the law. I was asked a question once on meaningful use. Large healthcare system. It wasn't just a hospital, it was a system. And I was giving the results of a FRSecure assessment to executive or the board, and the CFO was there. And the CFO had asked me, so Evan, is there, what do you say? CFOs are always into this. What's the ROI? I'm like, the ROI of being compliant? It's like, yeah, you don't have a choice. It's the law. I mean, there's no ROI. If you build a security program, and like you said, if your why is to gain a competitive advantage, you could potentially demonstrate an ROI in that. If we use this as a marketing tool, we can show that, hey, we're better than our competitors and we take your information security seriously, and on about those things. You could almost demonstrate an ROI in information security for that. You can't demonstrate an ROI for compliance. It's the law.
Yeah.
Just, whatever. So that's problem number 2. And I do talk about, in this, building a compliance program into information security versus the other way around. I could potentially, again, most of the time in information security, there's not a direct ROI. It's what we call a return on security investment. It's called ROSI. And it's taking the annual, if you can figure this out, and if you want to figure it out, to quantify your annual loss expectancy and then compare that with the cost of a control before and after. Then you can potentially figure out some return on information security investment. But the right approach is to build compliance into security, not the other way around. That's those questions, or I'm sorry, those things. The solution, how we comply. And again, it's really driving home multiple reasons for building compliance into security versus the other way around. This is just another case for that. You don't have a choice but to comply, but how you comply, you do have a choice. There are multiple ways to get there. When I control that message about how I'm going to comply, then I can implement my best interests into it better, right?
Yeah.
Compliance makes for a crappy foundation. I don't know if you remember chapter 2. Chapter 2 is about bad foundations, how we build security programs without foundational and fundamental, concepts and things. Probably the most important foundational component of an information security program functionally is asset management. It still baffles me how many organizations have no idea what it is they're even trying to protect. So asset management is key. Physical assets, software assets, and data assets. Those are the 3 primary assets that we're concerned about. Don't even try to figure out, I guess there's human capital as well. You can put that in there if you wanted to try to put that into your inventory. But it's really those 3. It's hardware, software, and data assets. So if I were to build a security program from the beginning, first I would create a plan, which is also covered in chapter 2. What would my plan include? My plan would include my why. It would include really the 5 W's. The why am I building a security program? Who is responsible for this security program? So laying out, we usually put that in a charter type document, something that's going to charter this thing. What and the who, what's the other one? How we're going to accomplish the plan. That would usually lend itself then and lead to a roadmap. But anyway, that's the first thing I would start with. And the second thing I would start with is an asset inventory. Or I would start probably with a risk assessment in there somewhere too, so I know kind of what I'm working with. But that asset inventory, if I don't know which assets I have, how can I possibly secure them effectively? If I don't know what servers I have, what applications I have, what And what most people do, because they do like shortcuts, is they run their vulnerability scanner or vulnerability scanning tools and then assume that that's our asset inventory. Usually it's better to separate that out, because the quality of my asset inventory will lead to the quality of my vulnerability management program. So usually having those as two separate things. So that's how I would build a security program, just high level stuff. Whereas if compliance is going to be my foundation for a security program, I'm going to start with checkboxes. You know, what do I need to do? Asset management may not even be mentioned anywhere in the compliance requirements, so I'll miss it. I won't even do it. Because after asset management comes access control, right? I know what assets I have. Now let's figure out what access, you know, needs to be in place. I also need to figure out change control, because I can't secure the things I can't control, right? So those are foundational kind of things that I build a security program, whereas compliance is, take the audit protocol, for instance, from the OCC, I'm saying OCR. Well, it says I have to have this, check. I have to have this policy, check. I have to this, you know, it makes for a crappy foundation. They talk about all that stuff. Oh, I talk about, this is some personal stuff. I do have a lot of stories in here. But one is like, reminds me of my childhood. I grew up an only child, and both my mother and my father were in the Marine Corps. My father was 20 years in the Marine Corps, gunnery sergeant. My mother was 6 years in the Marine Corps. My mother worked for my father in the Marine Corps. And somehow out of all that came me. And so I talk about how I certainly get compliance, right? You know, when you were told to do something, you did it. And usually didn't do anything more than that. And until you got like, one of the things my father used to say to me, look around the house for things to do. If I have to tell you to do it, it's too late. It's like, all right, I'm like 10. I don't know. That's the way it was. So, you know, the intent of the law was very hard to decipher. You know, what did he mean? Did that mean bathrooms? I don't know. So, but anyway, I figured it out. I lived. Compliance-based, or I'm sorry, compliance making a crappy foundation also leads to, you know, mediocrity and triteness. More discussion on that. The solution to all of that is building a security program, you know, focusing on the foundation, which was fully described and talked about in chapter 2 about what a foundation of a security program is. Starting with planning, strategy. It's just like when you build a house. Right? Would you build a house without a plan?
No.
Blueprints, something, you know, it tells me what the heck I'm building. Security programs work the same way. And then after I have a plan, if I have blueprints, I need to take it to the permit office, right? Someone's got to give me approval to build this thing. Same thing happens with the security program. I have my plans. I need to go to executive management, or I need to go to the board of directors, and somebody needs to approve it. Once it's approved, now I can start building. And it's funny how nobody really likes, I mean, nobody seems to care about foundations until it fails. And then everybody's wondering, what the hell happened? Well, you have no asset inventory. So that's why you can't manage your vulnerabilities well. Anyway, so focus on the foundation. Planning, strategy, buy-in, asset management, access control, change control, those should all be part of your foundation. Colonel in the Air Force. So there's another guy who gets the military grow up stuff. All right, so that's the chapter. You know, really just drilling home. Stop focusing so much on compliance and really focus on your own information security risks that will be defensible, whereas the other way around is variable. You know that the intent of most information, if not all, information security regulations are to manage risk well. That is the intent behind almost every one that I've seen. If you look at the guidance from FFIEC on GLBA compliance, you look at the guidance given from Department of Health and Human Services on Hipaa, I mean, all of them, the intent is that you manage risk well, that you put yourself in a good defensible position on your risk decision making Yeah, as opposed to just doing what they tell you. All right, we got 10 minutes. What else do we want to talk about? Anybody want to ask any questions, give us any insights or struggles? No? Compliance? Boring? Probably. All right, well, I'll tell you next Hangout. What are we talking about next Hangout? Ooh, I like this one. I like them all because I kind of wrote them. But the lights do that every time I come in here.
We didn't move enough.
So empty promises is the next chapter. And the tagline is, the information security industry is broken because we don't commit and keep our word. It'll be an interesting chapter. This chapter, I didn't go through the tagline. I should have done that. The tagline for this chapter was it? Information security is broken because people don't want to do the right thing. That's kind of a boring one.
It's not a snappy.
No, I could still go back and change it, but it is what it is. If no one has questions, then tell a few stories. Oh, stories. It's always hard to tell stories like when you're on the spot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Stories. Okay. Well, last week, crap, I can't tell company name. Well, I'll tell you the story between, on a vendor risk management and indirect compliance problem, and this one's in the book. I know of an organization that was actually put out of business because they couldn't comply. A large percentage of all this company's business came from one large company. Well, that one large company was in a heavily regulated industry and was being pushed by their regulator to do assessments of their vendors, and they didn't do it well. They did that. You have the same controls in place that we have in controls in place. This happened to be a 60-ish employee printing company in Phoenix, Arizona, and I was the assessor. So I was the one that was, wasn't employed by them. I was commissioned, I guess, by them to go out and do an assessment of this mom and pop printing company. So I went and did this assessment of this mom and pop printing company, and 15 minutes in, I knew that this wasn't going to go well. You don't have anywhere near the controls in place. It's not that you're not managing risk well. It's that you don't have these controls in place. And I know what this other company is going to say about this. And so you're going to end up losing the business. Now, the fact that I was there on behalf of the other company, I also wasn't allowed to consult. I wasn't there. I wasn't allowed to help you build your security program. So you're missing all these policies. Let's just take the next 2 days and write all these policies. I'm here for 2 days anyway. I already know what you're going to rate as. But we did do that. So 15 minutes of like, oh my God. And then another 2 days, including time in the hotel, to try to write as much and build as much of the security program as we could, because a lot of the structure stuff wasn't there. But at the end of the day, they lost the business. And I don't know what, I didn't follow up with them after that, but I think they lost. I'm sure they had to laugh 30, 40 workers of their 60. It was that much business that this company got. That was really sad to see that, be a part of that.
So the larger business that was using this printing company, as a consultant for them, can you go back and say, they can become compliant with all of this. This is how long it will take them.
Yeah, a lot of times you can do that unless it's just so far off. So anytime I'm faced with a risk, I have one of 4 decisions. I can accept it as is. All right, I get it. I'm cool with it. I can mitigate it, ask you to do some things to fix things. I can transfer it, see if I can get some insurance against this relationship. Or the 4th thing is just avoid it, right? So if I think there's going to be too much work in, I certainly can't accept it because according to my requirements, not necessarily risk, but according to my requirements, which I'm going to interpret as risk, you're so far off, I can't accept it. Mitigation, yeah, you can mitigate, but here's your mitigation plan. It's $345,000. when can you have this done? Well, it's overwhelming. Plus, I don't see any business benefit in it. Yes, I'll keep your business, but beyond that, there's nothing else I can use this for. It's just sitting here.
Yeah.
So if the mitigation plan is too big, too much, too long, the big company might also decide, you're just too far off. We're just going to look for another vendor. Because in this case, there are other printing companies, right? I mean, there's lots of printing companies that you can certainly go, it's almost like a commodity. And you're starting to see, so the same thing sort of happens with, I think with some of the, like high trust is, you have to pay a lot of money if you're going to play that game. So if a company like UHG or another, company is using high trust assessments, they're not paying for the cost. UHG doesn't pay for the high trust assessment for you as a vendor. If you want to do business, and I don't know if UHG does this with all of them, but there are some organizations that use high trust as their vendor risk management tool, and it's expensive in some cases, $20,000, $50,000, $100,000 or more for you to become high trust compliant. So then you can get our business. Well, that locks like a big portion of the market is can't get into that business.
Yeah.
If I'm a 1-2 employee company, there may be no risk here, right? I mean, everything's very, very, or not no, very little risk. Everything's very, very secure, but I can't become high trust compliant. I don't have $100,000. Too bad. So I think there's better ways to do a lot of the compliance things that we see. Most of the entertaining stories, Andrew, that I have are social engineering related, because that's the ones that are sort of entertaining. Working with a big company now that, I don't know, I think it might be in the book too. When we first started working with them, I asked them, how many domains do you have? How many Active Directory domains do you have? That's what I asked. Because they were struggling with having, they have an outsourced security operations center. And the way security operations centers work is you send them all your logs, they massage, all their logs, use their rules, whatever. That's big, outsourced kind of SIEM solution. And then you usually have some analyst or somebody who's reviewing the results of those logs and then maybe tuning or alerting you to things that you need to be concerned about. Well, in this case, they were like, we're not getting any alerts. What's wrong? It's broken. It's broken. The service sucks. The service sucks. It's like, well, what are you giving them? I mean, what's being logged? What's being sent to them to work through? Because it's going to be garbage in, garbage out. And so let's start with, because a big part of that for logging would be, your domains. How many Active Directory domains do we have here? And the lead security analyst says, well, I think 6 or 7. Like, you think 6 or 7? I mean, that's like a domain, right? I'm not talking like how many computers do you have? I'm like, how many Active Directory domains do you have? So I'm like, well, we need to find a definitive answer, 6 or 7. So we start investigating. We get, some infrastructure folks and whatever, and finally find the right answers. 11. You have 11 domains. And I'm not even going to go down the route of why do you have 11 domains. That's something we'll have to tackle later, but you have 11 domains. And obviously 4 or 5 of them you weren't even accounting for, right?
So it's like someone is reviewing the security feed from a camera, but the 4 cameras that are facing the entryways aren't getting reviewed. It's the camera that's facing a blank wall.
Yeah, but in Active Directory too, we also, there are so many different directory objects. Identity and access management is a big piece that comes up, right, with Active Directory. Because that's where user accounts are stored, their authentication stuff. So we have 4 or 5 domains that we haven't really done any audit of user accounts. I mean, I don't know how many user accounts there are in each of these domains. I don't know how many of the user accounts are still enabled and they're not here anymore. I don't know how many user accounts we have that, passwords that never expire. I don't know how many user accounts have been set up and never logged into before. That's usually an indication that somebody, we set somebody up in the system and then they never started working here. So it's like, my God, so it's a foundational, fundamental thing, right? Asset management, and then access control is also part of that foundation. And that's a big, well-funded, multi-billion-dollar company, basic stuff, right? So the big companies haven't got it all figured out yet either. So maybe you take heart in knowing that if you don't have it all figured out, that's okay. Nobody has it all figured out. But yeah. All right. Well, we're 401. Next week is empty promises. That'll be kind of fun. I'm surprised I'm as politically correct as I have been, because I'm not that politically correct, really. Have I been politically correct?
I think so. I
Okay,
don't
I
know.
didn't
It's
swear.
anything blatant.
Don't like swearing. That's bad. All right. So that's next Hangout. I hope you guys had fun. Let me know if there's anything. You can always email us, reach out to us, get more talkative in these things. If you want to talk more, we're here to help. Take care. Have a good afternoon.